Well, hey guys, welcome back to the salon. Long time no see. I know I haven't been posting anything on this channel for a little while, just because, if you watch my 13 o'clock stuff, you know that I actually ended up having to get a full-time job, so I don't have as much time to do these videos as I used to be able to. But hopefully I'm still going to try and keep up and try to do at least one a week, hopefully more if I have time. But we'll see how everything goes. So this movie that we're talking about today, this is not one that I actually planned to do, but it was just, I was just kind of in the mood one day and I was like, what the hell? So the 70s, anybody that was alive during that time, including me, 70s were a weird time, man. This is probably why the movies that came out during that decade are always kind of a trip to watch, at least for me. Now, in the case of the movie that we're talking about today, I actually mean a trip to watch, pretty much literally, because this particular movie was written as kind of a cautionary tale, I guess, about the dangers of LSD. So this is kind of I guess you could call it the reefer madness of the disco era or whatever. Now, I don't actually remember the first time that I heard about Blue Sunshine, the movie. It actually came out in 1977, I think, in limited release, and then a wider release later on in 1978. I feel ever since I was probably a teenager, I feel I was always kind of aware of its existence, and I figured I would probably get around to watching it eventually because it's kind of seen as, I don't want to go too far in one direction, but it is kind of seen as a minor cult classic, and it's sort of that drug scaremongering thing, and those are usually kind of amusing. So I was like, okay, well, I'll get around to watching that eventually. But, for whatever reason over the years, I just never really pulled the trigger on it. But then the other day I was scrolling through Shudder and they happened to have it on there. It's been on there for a little while. And I was like, I was kind of in the mood that day for some 70s cult weirdness. So, I just metaphorically popped that tab right on my tongue and settled in for the experience of finally getting around to watching Blue Sunshine. Now, while I will say that this film is fairly strange, it's not nearly as bizarre as I was expecting it to be, given its sort of, as I said, minor cult reputation. That kind of bummed me out a little bit, not gonna lie. I think because I didn't know a lot about the movie, but I did know that it was kind of like I said, a drug scaremongering thing about bad acid, you know what I mean? So I was kind of anticipating something more crazy freakouts and weird kaleidoscopic visuals and maybe some acid rock on the soundtrack, all crazy and stuff like that. But the movie ends up being, it's surprisingly low key. It's interestingly quirky, but like I said, it's not as crazy as I was expecting it to be. It kind of felt to me a little bit more low rent, early Cronenberg film, you know what I mean? Maybe Rabbit or Shivers or something like that. Or maybe something directed by Larry Cohen, if Larry Cohen was substantially less talented than he actually is. And I don't really mean to be uncharitable by saying that, because this is actually a pretty decent movie. And Blue Sunshine, matter of fact, was directed by Jeff Lieberman, the guy who gave us also the delightfully cheesy 1976 killer worm movie, Squirm. So, which is actually a fun little flick if you haven't seen it. I would recommend the MST3K version, but actually Squirm is a good enough cheesy 70s movie that you could probably watch it on its own, but obviously it's much better with the riffing. Now, Blue Sunshine 2 also features just a star-studded array of very recognizable TV and movie actors from that era. The main character is played by a dude named Zalman King, who was also a writer and director, mostly of erotica. I feel like he got into that later on. He even collaborated with Adrian Lyne on 9.5 Weeks, in 1986. Now, I mainly recognized him from an actor standpoint, and the main thing I recognized him from was Roger Corman's 1981 Alien ripoff, Galaxy of Terror, because he was in that. There was also Deborah Winters, who was kind of best known for being in Koch with Walter Matthau, and she was also in the TV movie Tarantulas, The Deadly Cargo. So, I'd seen her in a lot of things. Otherwise, she was in a lot of TV shows. You also had Robert Walden, who was in a fuck ton of stuff. He was on the Lou Grant TV show, if you guys remember that. He was in a bunch of really good movies, too. He was in, All the President's Men. He was in Audrey Rose. He was in Capricorn 1. Most of those we've actually reviewed on the show. So he was probably the most recognizable to me. Then you also have Charles Siebert, who was in Trapper John MD, and he later went on to direct a bunch of episodes of like Xena, Warrior Princess, and like the Hercules, Legendary Journey or whatever the fuck it's called, like those TV shows. He directed those. And you also have Ray Young, who was in a bunch of like kind of cheesy horror movies back in the day, like Blood of Dracula's Castle, Five Bloody Graves. He was also in Coffee, the blaxploitation film. And I have to say too, there were two very small but wildly appreciated cameo appearances, essentially, by the always awesome Alice Ghostly, who played Esmeralda on Bewitched, and she was also like the cool shop teacher, Mrs. Murdoch from Grease. And motherfucking Brian James is in this as well. Brian James, probably to viewers of this, probably needs no introduction. He was in Blade Runner. He was in 48 Hours. He was in The Horror Show. He was in Tango and Cash. He was in The Fifth Element. He's been in like a million things. Very, very recognizable character actor. So he's in this for maybe 5 minutes. Maybe that's being generous. It might not even be that long. And I have to say that Brian James in this randomly impersonates Rodan at a party in this. So if that's kind of like your secret fantasy that you always wanted to see, then Blue Sunshine is definitely the movie for you, because yes, that definitely happens in this film. So I feel like Blue Sunshine is usually regarded and usually, described as a horror movie. But I'm going to say it's more of a 70s style conspiracy thriller, like maybe with some minor horror elements. You can tell that the filmmakers were going for a sort of Hitchcockian, like wrong man accused of a crime type narrative, and that really never manages to come together. The movie does have enough odd little details that I think that fans of cult cinema from, the 70s, from that shag carpet era, should probably dig it. But I feel like if you're not really on that wavelength, or you're not really in the mood for it, it might fall a bit flat. Like, in my opinion, it's a decent watch, but it's probably like, it falls into that gray area where it's probably like too strange for like mainstream, like basic movie tastes, and not weird enough to be like so bad it's good, even though the concept behind it is actually like pretty good and pretty intriguing. And I feel like something really like wacky and crazy and insane could be made from this, but this one is a lot more, like I said, a lot more subdued than I was expecting it to be given the premise. So at the beginning of the movie, there are a couple of different things going on that don't seem initially related to one another. So it's a little bit scattered, like when you first, because you're like, who the fuck is this now? And who the fuck are these people? You know what I mean? So first you have this kind of raggedy looking woman who is, like lamenting the state of her marriage to a guy who's sitting with her at the kitchen table. Is this her lover, her brother, the plumber, just like a random dude that showed up? But I don't know. Who knows? I don't think they ever say. Now, while they're talking about the husband actually comes home without their knowledge and just kind of like stands there in the kitchen doorway and sort of looking at them kind of blankly, psychotically, something like that. And then there's this woman named Wendy in an apartment, and she's babysitting the two kind of bratty kids of her neighbor who lives down the hall. We find out later that Wendy is in the process of divorcing a guy whose name is Ed Fleming, who's actually running for Congress, like during the course of the movie. And then in the third kind of whiplashy sort of scene introduction, there's kind of like this small gathering party situation like happening at this cabin looking house, which is kind of out in the hills. And I mean, this party is like so 70s that you can kind of, you could like just smell the fondue, you know what I'm saying? And it's just like you're waiting for everybody to toss their keys in a bowl. If you're around in the 70s, if you know what a key party is. If you don't, like, look it up, I'm sure it's on Google. So I'm sure it's on Wikipedia or whatever. So it's at this party that we actually meet our two main characters. And the main guy is named Jerry Zipkin, and he's called Zippy throughout the movie. Make of that what you will. So that's the character that's played by Zalman King, and his girlfriend, Alicia Sweeney, who's the one that's played by Deborah Winters. There are also, like, a bunch of other people at the party, but spoiler alert, they don't last too long, most of them, so I don't even remember, like, what their names were. So another guy at the party, whose name is Franny, who's played, everybody has weird fucking names in this, I don't know why. He's played by Richard Crystal. So he gets goaded into singing a Sinatra song for everybody, because I guess that's kind of his thing. Like, they're just like, oh, sing the song, and he's just like, oh, okay, you know what I mean? So he'd, like, just kind of start singing it. I don't know how this movie, which it didn't cost that much to make, I don't know how they got the rights to Sinatra songs. Maybe they didn't. They were just kind of like, fuck it, we're just gonna put all good... Because there's some more Sinatra stuff like later on, and we'll get into that. But right in the middle of singing the song, like he seems like he's all into it, and everybody's like, yeah, he's the Gynchiest or whatever. And then in the middle of the song, he just randomly starts trying to mac on like one of the other dude's girlfriends, wives, whoever. And then so that guest is like, hey, bro, what the fuck? And like tries to pull him off. But then he ends up pulling off the dude's wig, so she's like wearing a wig. So revealing that Franny is bald. And because everyone is alarmed by this, I'm assuming that he wasn't bald before. He's not like completely bald, but there are still like these kind of like messy hanks of hair sort of hanging out all willy-nilly, like the shit's been like falling out, you know what I mean? So at this point, the dude completely loses it. And at first, I'm just kind of like, well, is he really that mad that like everybody found out that he was bald? Wow, he's like kind of overreacting, but that's not what's going on. I'm just saying. So, but yeah, he just like completely flips out. His eyes go black and he just like starts kicking the shit out of everybody, right? And at one point, he even like stuffs one of the women into the fireplace, like, and she burns to death. And it's like, and you can tell it's like a real stunt because like the stunt woman or stunt man, you can't really tell, but she's kind of like and she's trying to like crawl out and he's like, get the fuck back in there, you know what I mean? I'm like, holy crap, I was actually like, pretty impressed by that stunt. So he pushes the woman into the fireplace and then takes off into the surrounding woods, like around the house. And Zippy runs, I can't believe I have to call this guy that, but that's what his name is. So he like runs after him. And then the rest of the party guests just kind of like jump in a car and they're trying to go find him or whatever. To like, what the fuck happened with that? You know what I mean? He was just singing Sinatra 1 second and then the next second he's like pushing somebody into a fireplace. It's it's a little bit of a tonal shift. I'll say that. So Zippy ends up finding Franny, and the pair of them are like kind of struggling, but on the side of this highway. But then a fortuitous truck happens by, like on the road, and Zippy kind of accidentally on purpose sort of like pushes Franny in front of the truck, and the truck hits him and kills him. Now, rather than doing the smart thing and explaining what the fuck is going on to the two men in the truck, Zippy just runs off like into the woods, and one of the truck guys, thinking they just saw a murder because obviously that's what it looked like, he actually shoots at Zippy and wings him in the arm. It's just like a real minor, like just a little flesh wound or whatever. Zippy then makes his way back to the house, and then he discovers that in the melee, like after no one was paying attention or whatever, Franny actually ended up stuffing 3 of the women at the party into the fireplace. It's like a big fireplace, you know what I mean? Obviously, because 3 people like fit in it. And rather than doing, again, the smart thing and calling the cops, Zippy just kind of sits there, almost like he's in shock maybe, and he stares at their scorched bodies in the fireplace, which gives the authorities ample time to arrive at the house and accuse him of murder. But Zippy manages to escape, like he runs out the back or whatever, and he essentially, like for most of the rest of the movie, he goes on the lam. Now, the first place he goes to is to visit his friend, who is a surgeon named Dr. Bloom, who's played by Robert Walton, who's actually, I think, my favorite character in this movie. So he fixes up his arm. Like, Zippy just says, oh, I was shot in a hunting accident. And like, Dr. Bloom doesn't buy it. He's like, are you sure that's the story you want to tell me? He's like, yep, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So he just kind of leaves it at that. So then Zippy's girlfriend, Alicia, is convinced that he's innocent, obviously. They haven't been together that long. I think they say like a year and a half or something like that. She's like, he would never do anything like that. You know what I mean? So she actually starts meeting him on the down low to kind of help him sort out how he's going to clear his name and like prove that he's innocent. Now, shortly afterward, while they're meeting in sort of secret, but not really, because they're on this, it's like a campus or something. I don't really know what it is, but it's like this big sort of like mall forecourt. I don't know what the fuck it is, but they're like meeting there, and it's like in the daytime. You'd think he would want to be sneakier, but like I said, he's not like the sharpest tool in the shed. So shortly afterward, while they're meeting, they see a newspaper article like on the front page of like a tabloid or something about a guy, like a different guy, who lost all his hair, flipped out suddenly, and killed his entire family, including the dog, which at least they don't show that, because that would have been like really upsetting, because you guys know how I am about animal deaths in movies. So this scenario sounded very much like what happened with, the late lamented Franny, who went bald and flipped out and killed a bunch of people. This other flipped out guy, incidentally, I can't remember what his name was, but it was the same guy that we saw at the beginning, who came home and found his wife talking to that other random dude at the kitchen table. So that explains like what was going on there. So we're seeing like a lot of the link up. So Zippy and Alicia also discover that both Franny and the other flipped out dude, whose name I can't remember, went to Stanford 10 years before. Then Zippy breaks into what I think is Franny's house and looks in his photography studio, because he was a photographer. And he finds in his studio this kind of trippy looking, hilarious, I have to say it's very hilarious, picture of, again, aspiring Congressman Ed Fleming, who I mentioned earlier. And this trippy photo, which kind of, I don't know what it reminds me of, but it's just him looking up going like, oh, and it's got like all this fucking purple shit around, you know what I mean? It's that very kind of 70s hippy dippy looking kind of shit. So there's a picture of him, and then like on a little thing underneath, like one of those those things that you, like label maker deals, and somebody made something underneath and it just says Blue Sunshine on it. Presumably that's the name of the picture. So Zippy goes to one of Ed Fleming's political rallies to ask the guy if he knows what Blue Sunshine is. But Ed Fleming pretty much clams up immediately. Nope, I don't know what you're talking about. La la la, not at all. Even though it's pretty clear that he knows exactly what the fuck Blue Sunshine is, and Zippy is like, yeah, you know exactly what that is. Why won't you tell me? And he gets like a little cranky about it, and he has to kind of get kicked out. So then Zippy goes to his friend, the surgeon, Dr. Bloom, who also went to Stanford 10 years ago, as it happens, because holy crap, everything is like very coincidental in this. So he asked him if he ever heard of Blue Sunshine. And Dr. Bloom doesn't really remember at first, but then like the more he thinks about it, he's like, oh, you know what? Actually, Blue Sunshine was, as I previously alluded to, a particular type of LSD that Ed Fleming was selling to a bunch of students back then. I don't know if he actually made it or if he just like got it from some chemist or something on campus, but he was like the big guy that was selling it. Dr. Bloom said that I actually did buy some from him, like to sell it, but I never took any of it myself, because there is kind of like there's a little bit of a red, I don't know if I'd call it a red herring, but they want you to think that maybe Dr. Bloom like took the shit too, because like some of his hair is falling out, but it turns out that it was just stress or whatever. And I don't know, it's because, and one time too, like he's in surgery and they're trying to make it seem like he's having a freak out and oh my God, he's going to kill the person on the table or whatever. But then it turns out that he didn't take it. So it just kind of goes nowhere. And I don't really know why they put that in there. Like, I know why they put that in there. Like I said, as like a red herring. Oh no, his best friend is going to flip out too. But then like nothing ends up happening with that. Like, I don't know. So yeah, so Dr. Bloom never took any. But he says a bunch of other people that he knew, including obviously Franny and the first flipped out guy, whose name I can't remember, they definitely had bought it and taken it. So from this information, Zippy is able to surmise that this LSD, this Blue Sunshine, had caused some kind of like time-delayed chromosomal damage that caused everyone who partook in this bad acid like a decade ago to suddenly just start losing their hair and turn into psychotic maniacs, like pretty much all at the same time. Now, even though he gets all this figured out, proving this hypothesis obviously is quite another matter. And I have to say that in terms, I think I've kind of brought this up a couple times before, Zippy is really not helping his case with some of the really lunkheaded shit he does in the course of this investigation where he's trying to like prove that he's innocent, right? Like he goes to visit Ed Fleming's ex-wife, or soon-to-be ex-wife, Wendy, who we, the audience, know is also on the verge of a freak out because she's been complaining about headaches and noise sensitivity, and she's very clearly wearing a wig, so we know that she's, going bald and doesn't want anybody to know about it. So Wendy, inexplicably, like Zippy shows up at her apartment and she lets him, a total stranger, into her apartment where she's alone, like babysitting her neighbor's 2 children. And he starts asking her about Blue Sunshine, and of course she denies knowing anything about it. But Zippy is just being so creepy and like, I don't know, like I can't like describe like how fucking creepy he's being. He's not being like overtly, like he's not grabbing her or anything like that, but he's just kind of like standing there staring at her weirdly and like asking her weird questions. I don't know. And so she eventually gets weirded out by him and, kicks him out, and probably like understandably so. After he leaves, though, just like a couple minutes later, she has her promised psychotic break. So she basically like tears her wig off. She's completely bald, and she starts chasing the 2 kids around the apartment with a knife. Even though the kids, like the kid actors, are obviously laughing, like thinking it's having the time of their lives. You know what I mean? Even though they're supposed to be scared. So Zippy, either he uses his spidey senses or he hears a scream or something like that. And he surmises like, oh, I bet that chick is like flipping out right now. So he's in the elevator, but then he goes back up and he runs back to her apartment and busts the door down. And he's actually able to save the kids before the woman stabs them. But unfortunately, somehow, during his struggle with Wendy, she gets flung out the balcony window, like over the balcony, and perishes horribly, like on the concrete, like many floors below. And then, of course, like the neighbors and the authorities and stuff like all rush into the apartment to see what's going on because they've heard all the commotion. And Zippy is just standing there by the window like a dickhead, holding a bloody knife while the two kids are sitting there screaming in terror. So, again, not real good optics for somebody who's hoping to be absolved of murder someday. But, Zippy seems to be his own worst enemy in that regard, mostly because he seems like he's not all that bright. So shortly after this, Zippy and Alicia, because he's able to evade the authorities once again because he's fucking like a ninja or whatever. So Zippy and Alicia figure out that Ed Fleming's assistant, who's also kind of like his one-man goon squad, he's like this real big like former football player or something like that, and his name is Wayne Mulligan, and he also took the Blue Sunshine, and so they presume that he's eventually going to flip out as well. So Alicia arranges to meet him for drinks in a mall discotheque, because apparently they had those back in the 70s. I don't remember going to any mall that had a disco in it, but apparently some did. So she's actually been working with a somewhat sympathetic cop, like without Zippy's knowledge. So I'm guessing she set up this whole date with Wayne, saying it's like, she kind of pretended like she was into him, you know what I mean? Because he was being real creepy and like fucking a little sexually assaulty, you know what I mean? And as far as like grabbing her, like, you're going to come out on a date with me. But so she was just kind of like, okay, yeah, I could use this situation. So she's kind of hoping, I guess, that when she meets this douche for a date, that he'll either like divulge some information about Blue Sunshine that will help her absolve Zippy, or he will freak out and go like on a bald-headed rampage through the disco, which, happily for us, that's what happens. You know what I mean? So Wayne Mulligan, he loses his hair in the bathroom, and then he just like tears through the place just like a rabid bear. Like he's just flinging 70s party people like like hither and yon, like with all the neon lights and mirror balls and all that kind of shit. It's pretty awesome. I think that was probably like my favorite scene, where he just goes and like starts throwing people around. But yeah, so it sends like everybody that was in the disco, like I said, it's in a mall, so there's kind of like a stampede out of the disco and like into the mall proper. And it so happens that in the other part of the mall, Ed Fleming is giving a political rally. For some reason, at this political rally, they thought it would be a good idea to entertain the people with a puppet show, which it's kind of like a Punch and Judy kind of situation, like it's set up like that. But the puppets, they're kind of cool, actually. They're kind of cool looking, and they do like some close-ups where they're singing and stuff. But they're kind of unsettling looking. And one of them is Frank Sinatra and one of them is Barbra Streisand. And I was like, I really find it hard to believe that they got the rights to not only use their songs, because they were singing them, the puppets were singing rather, but to use their likenesses. And I'm just like, did they get sued? I don't know. I didn't hear about that. But I mean, they're really cool puppets. They're really well done, but they're also like super creepy. So seeing this whole scene and being like, why would you have like a puppet show with Barbara? What the fuck does that have to do with anything? And then I thought somebody had like dosed me with Blue Sunshine while I was watching, because this was like the weirdest part, really. And it's not really that weird in the grand scheme of things, but I was just like watching them like, what the fuck is happening right now? Like, what is with these puppets? I didn't get it. But yeah, so but it does really happen in the movie. It wasn't just me tripping balls. So all of this, like through the stampede through the mall and all of that. So all of this leads to this sort of climax where Zippy chases Wayne through a department store. Oh, and I forgot to mention too that this movie is actually set at Christmas. So you could technically call it a holiday horror. They don't like go too much into it, but like there is, inside the mall, there's all Christmas trees and decorations and all the Christmas shit is out and everything. So you know what I mean? Now he eventually takes Wayne out with like a dart that's tipped in peraldehyde, and he loaded this into this Walther pistol that he bought earlier from in another very weird scene where this like very oddly enthusiastic gun dealer, and he was just kind of like, yeah, you have to put it in both hands and then go up like that and like up it, and then like he does it later like that's the way you have to do it, like it was a magical ritual. I don't know if you've seen it, like it's it's very strange. So he darts in with that. Oh, the peraldehyde that he put on the dart, he actually bought it on the sly earlier from Dr. Bloom, his friend. And this was also another kind of baffling scene, and it was set in a park. Like I said, he just goes and does this shit like in the daytime. I'm surprised he didn't get caught. But so he goes to this park, and Zippy is waiting for Dr. Bloom to show up to give him the stuff. And then he gets accosted by a junkie who, I'm assuming it's a junkie, who refers to him as Jimmy and like acts like he knows him and like, did you bring the stuff or something like that. But then like then he just like walks off, and the junkie's like looking at him like getting the stuff from the doctor, and he's just like looking at him like all fuck, and I'm like, what the fuck was that all about? Like that junkie's like that, he never shows up again. Like his purpose in the story is never explained. I don't know why he was calling Zippy Jimmy. I don't know why he acted like he knew him and it's like, hey, why don't you go buy my drugs or something like that. I don't know, it just didn't make any sense. So after Wayne, the the big rabid bear guy who flipped out in the disco, after he gets darted in the housewares department or whatever the fuck it was, like a lion on Serengeti, and he's just like knocked out or whatever. And then the movie literally just ends. Like it just pans back, like from Zippy like standing over his kill or whatever. The dude's not dead, but you know what I mean. And then it just stops. Like it just freeze frames with a couple of paragraphs talking about how this is kind of based on a true story, how they did some blood tests on Wayne later and it definitely showed signs of chromosomal damage, how the FBI still thought there was some unaccounted for doses of blue sunshine floating around out there, just waiting for somebody to take it and then go bald and batshit, like, to paraphrase one of the movie's more like famous lines of dialogue. So we never actually do find out if Zippy got cleared of murder. I'm assuming he did. If Ed Fleming ended up having to give up his political career after the whole, selling killer LSD in college thing came out about him. We never find out what happened to the first flipped out guy's pet parrot, who was kind of like, I thought that was going to be like a big plot thing, but it never like came to anything. And we also never find out why Brian James was pretending to be a pterodactyl at the party that kicked off the whole sordid affair. So, so the movie's not long. It's only like 94 minutes, but I was actually like pretty entertained all the way through. So the abrupt ending really it was very jarring for me because I was like, wait, that's it? You know what I mean? It's very weird. I mean, I guess I was expecting there to be one more scene where everything was kind of like wrapped up, but nope, it just stops. So I don't know if they just like ran out of money. They're like, well, that's a wrap. We'll just put some text on the end. It's like, yeah, bye. Have a nice day. Don't take LSD, kids. That's pretty much. So I feel like if you're really into just kind of odd 70s cinema, and you particularly like sort of overblown scaremongering drug panic films, because this is definitely one like that, although albeit like lower key than something like Reefer Madness, which made everybody act like complete psychopaths, like on weed, for fuck's sake. So if you like that kind of thing, this might kind of be your cup of tea or cup of ayahuasca or whatever. It's not as silly or as crazy as I would have liked, like for maximum entertainment value, but there is kind of enough random what the fuckery to kind of keep you interested in what's going on. It also definitely plays into that 70s political conspiracy thriller kind of vibe. So if you like those, you might dig that as well. And some of the acting, particularly by Robert Walden, who was Dr. Bloom, is pretty great. Like I said, he was pretty much my favorite character. I always liked him in everything that I've seen him in. But I have to say that the lead actor, Zalman King, he gives such a weird, like off-putting, understated, but also kind of like oddly creepy performance. It's really, really hard to relate to him or sympathize with him, even though technically, I mean, you're supposed to be sympathizing with him because he's like, he got wrongly accused of murder, and he's like, so the whole movie is, like I said, it's like a Hitchcock thriller where they're trying to prove their innocence. So he's trying to prove that this blue sunshine stuff like really exists, and all these people took it, and it's making them act crazy, and he didn't do any of this stuff. But you can't really sympathize with him because he's just such a, God, what's like the word I'm looking for? He's just he's so blank, and then like he's just so, I don't know, he just comes across a little bit like a weird, not exactly like a serial killer, but he just comes across as very, he underreacts to a lot of things, and he's just very blank. And so I don't know, like I feel like I read somewhere, I don't know if this is true or not, but his approach to the character was actually, the director, actually Jeff Lieberman, he actually told him to act like that. He wanted him to act sort of weird so that the audience wasn't sure if he had also taken the blue sunshine and he was like on the verge of like flipping out at any point, which I get that, but I think it came, like I said, at the expense of you actually like getting invested in his character and being like, oh shit, oh no, you know what I mean? Because you didn't sympathize with him because he seemed like kind of an idiot because he was doing all this stupid shit, like when he was trying to prove his innocence, but then he was doing real stupid shit like, oh, this woman just fell out a window and here I am standing here with a bloody knife like in her apartment while the kids are screaming. That doesn't look bad at all. You know what I mean? It's just like, it seems like there's, with just an iota of forethought, he could have really kind of, just shortened this whole entire process and explained what was going on instead of just acting as suspicious and creepy as possible. So he's not very likable. And even though I get why they were trying to, like I said, they were trying to like introduce red herrings and mystery and stuff like that, and you maybe were, expecting him to flip out too, but I think, as I said, that came at the expense of him being a sympathetic character, because he's really off-putting, and it's just a very strange vibe to the whole thing. So, I mean, obviously, this is definitely not a movie for everyone, but, then again, what is? But, I had a pretty good time with it. Like I said, it's kind of random. There's like some random weird shit in it. It's not crazy, but it is odd, you know what I mean? So if you like that kind of thing, maybe you will also have a good time with it. As I said, I don't know what other streaming services it's available on. I watched it on Shudder, and I'm presuming that it's really not that hard to get hold of. It's probably on different streaming services as well. So check it out, or if you've seen it, let me know what you think about it in the comments. And that will do it for this trip to the salon, and I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.